Welcome everyone. My name is Joris Verrossum. I am Program Director at STM Solutions, and I'm here with Claudia Russo, who's the Regional Manager of Public Affairs at STM. At the end of 2023, STM published a practical resource for stakeholders in a scholarly publishing ecosystem that addresses the increasingly significant role of generative AI in the publication process. This paper was developed by the AI Working Group of STM, and it provides practical, concrete recommendations for authors, editorial teams, reviewers, and vendors, ensuring a responsible and ethical approach to the use of generative AI tools. In this webinar, we will present the most important recommendations of this report. We'll end with a quick poll with a few questions to you about the report and Gen AI in general. And at the end, we have time for some questions. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box underneath your screen. We expect a relatively short session, so we think we will start. We will not need the entire hour. So let's go to the first slide. First, a few words about STM, in case you were not aware. So STM is the Global Association of Scientific, Technical, Medical Publishers. We have over 140 members from really small, the middle size as large organizations. And our mission is to advance trusted research. Next slide, please. So publishers, of course, have dealt with AI for a long time. Before generative AI, our role was mainly focused on three aspects. First, publishers have always played an important role as data providers with our high quality curated content we have, which is significant and important, of course, conditions for AI. Publishers have also used AI to support internal workflows and services, and publishers have also built externally facing tools and services. Next slide, please. In order to ensure an ethical, trustworthy, and human-centric AI, in 2021, STM has published a report, AI Ethics and Scholarly Communication, where we wrote down some best practice principles around the use of AI in the publication process. Those principles were on the level of transparency, accountability, quality and integrity, privacy, security, fairness, and sustainability. Then, of course, after 2021 came a big change, ChatGPT and more in general, generative AI, which was really a game changer with significant impact on society, but also on science and publishing. And a lot of discussions also with STM. We had several webinars dealing with this new technology, and what we do know that it is, next slide please, a double-edged sword. On the one hand, generative AI significantly can improve the quality of published material. It can lead to enormous efficiency improvements for all stakeholders in science and publishing, and can break more than ever language barriers. On the other hand, it blurs the lines between the machines and the researchers. It allows people to fake research on an unprecedented scale. More importantly, the current integrity checking tools, or at least before a few years ago, were not adapted to deal with generative AI, which is a big challenge. Last but not least, also questions around intellectual property, confidentiality, and security. So a lot of discussions. These discussions will continue for a while, and the goal of today is not to talk about them specifically, but to be very practical. So again, what we try to do in the report, and we're going to present today, is a very practical recommendations for the use of this generative AI for authors, editors, reviewers, publishers in general, as well as readers. So with that, I give the words to Claudia.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Joris. And as you were saying, we saw a big change, of course, at the end of 2022. And so it was imperative for STM to take action. And that's what we did starting in 2023. When we saw that what happened was that many publishers and in general stakeholders in science and in the research ecosystem came out with loads of different recommendations, guidelines. They adapted their editorial and author guidelines to reflect this new potential of AI used in research. And so we saw that many of our members came up with these policies, and we recognized that there was a need to have discussions first internally between the STM membership as to what the impact could be. And then there was also a role that STM could fulfill in terms of showing the industry where there is consensus on some of these practices, and maybe where there are some gray areas, but anyway, providing guidance as to where the consensus is in the use of generative AI in scholarly publishing. So that's why we decided to work on these recommendations, and we did so together with a dedicated working group within STM. And you see that several of our members took part, and certainly we could come to this output, this product, also building on the experience that publishers developed really quickly through concrete use cases within their own houses. So as Joris was saying, the guidelines covered several perspectives: authors, editorial teams, reviewers, vendors, third-party service providers, and readers. So I'll be taking those in turns. Before I proceed to that, there are two overarching considerations that are to be borne in mind as we go through the recommendations. There are really the rationale, let's say, for some of the decisions that we took in defining the recommendations. And those are, first of all, that there are several considerations, several angles to be taken into account that have to do with confidentiality, privacy, security, intellectual property, and those were really front of our minds as we considered what could be a recommendation in certain cases. So to safeguard these important principles and ethics, of course, what do we think is going to be an ethical behavior when using AI in science? And because of these aspects, we also made a very clear distinction in between publicly available generative AI tools, so basically those over which the user doesn't have any control in terms of terms and conditions of use. So they just have to tick a box and use the platform as it is proposed to them. So publicly available generative AI and in-house bespoke tools that are made available probably through a publisher to their team and staff and researchers affiliated. And usually those are services that are provided through a license or a contract, or it's an in-house tool over which then the publisher clearly has control about where the prompts go, how they're used, what are the feedback loops, and surely they can ensure also that confidentiality, IPRs, and privacy can be maintained. So with that preface, let's start by authors. So for authors, we identified two extremes that seems quite clear to us in what the recommendations should be. And one you see has to do with basic author support tool, which are permitted. So this type of use is permitted. And that is because grammar checks and spelling checks are integrated already to a certain extent in programs as basic as Word. So it's not going to be feasible nor sometimes even possible for researchers to disclose when those AI-based tools kick in. And the other extreme is instead where we know that AI shouldn't be used, and that is in creating, altering, manipulating research data. So for instance, generating images or X-rays, and then maybe even research results and papers on top of those. That is a clear non-permitted use. And also somewhere where the consensus consolidated quite quickly is that generative AI shouldn't be credited as the author of a published work. The responsibility should stay firmly with a human author. Then, when it comes to editorial teams, as I was saying, they shouldn't be using publicly available generative AI. They can, and actually, we also encourage the use and experimentation with bespoke tools or partnership with new actors in this space. In places in circumstances where copyright confidentiality, privacy, all these that we've been mentioning repeatedly, where those can be ensured, and the responsibility lies with publishers to ensure that those safeguards are in place. Whilst generative AI is the use of generative AI is welcomed in assisting editorial teams, and there's a number of ways in which that can happen. Human oversight is necessary, and especially when taking decisions, the editorial team needs to be in the driving seat, and they need to maintain responsibility, especially when we're talking about the final decision as to whether to accept a manuscript or not, as to whether the manuscript contributes to the literature or and is worthwhile of publication. That should really stay with editorial teams. When it comes to reviewers, we don't encourage the creation of review reports anew with generative AI. And especially, again, when it comes to publicly available platforms, those shouldn't be used for nor for substance nor for form check. So not even as a basic author support tool, as we named it. Just really because the manuscript, when it's under review, when it's been submitted, is a very critical phase, and confidentiality is paramount in this phase, and it should be safeguarded over the use of the implementation of the use of AI in this phase. So we're very firm on that. And what we've seen is, in general, that other guidelines are extremely cautious about the peer review phase. When a reviewer has the suspicion of a violation of the disclosure requirement, or in general of the journal policy, then it should be reporting that to editors, so that a decision can be taken as to how to proceed in that case. For third-party service providers, of course, the use of AI is welcome, as far as it's been agreed with publishers and pending the review of terms and conditions, review and approval of those by publishers. And then finally, for readers, they shouldn't be uploading manuscripts nor articles at whichever phase onto publicly available generative AI for the reasons described so far. In the same way as the use of AI is disclosed upon submission, it's important that disclosure is maintained in the interface with readers too. And especially publishers and journals should make sure that readers are informed as to what their policies are when it comes to the use of generative AI. So in summary, we feel like there's consensus around all of these elements. We see that the majority of publishers are embracing the use of AI, are experimenting in this area. There are very few bans to the extent that we're aware of. One thing that that everybody and all guidelines agree upon is that responsibility stays with authors. That authors can use AI, and anything that goes beyond the grammar spelling check needs to be disclosed. One key part that should stay with humans is absolutely peer review, because of confidentiality and intellectual property aspects, and because of those, authors, reviewers, and readers should respect those and not upload articles as prompts, essentially, into GenAI platforms. This is in brief what we have on the recommendations, but since we're on the topic of AI, we thought that we would also highlight a couple of other things that are going on at STM. And one has to do with Article 4. Article 4 of the EU Copyright Directive that comes really close in regulating the use of well, any type of content, but also academic content for AI training, which we know that is one of the main use cases when it comes to AI. So what the legislation allows publishers to do is to decide and inform AI companies, AI providers, that they reserve their rights over their content, and they don't want that to be used for for text and data mining purposes, but that can be interpreted very broadly as to also mean AI. So we're working with a working group within STM with our members to define ways that we can express that reservation within publishers' platforms and articles and so on. So that's forthcoming, and yeah, more will be coming on that. And I turn then to yours for the Integrity Hub.
Yes, because we mentioned the double-edged sword. So there is indeed the risk of the misuse of generative AI. It is extremely easy with this technology to fake text and images, etc. So how do we deal with screening that? That is something we are also thinking about and working on in the context of the Integrity Hub. So in the context of this initiative, we are building screening tools supporting publishers with looking at incoming manuscripts and detecting any misuse of fraudulent behavior. The challenge here, of course, is that it's very difficult. We probably have seen the discussions around ChatGPT and how to detect it. It has proven very difficult, if not impossible. Still, we're looking at this, but also we're looking in order to check the validity of incoming manuscripts at other signals. We're looking at, for example, the researchers themselves, the identity. We're thinking about potentially having watermarks on images that are incoming, asking for raw data. So again, looking broader than just the manuscripts to make sure we can determine the validity of research. This is an ongoing discussion, especially generative AI has big implications for images and image alteration and duplication. Images, of course, form an important part of submitted research, and also a lot of fraud and manipulation takes place on these images. We have a further discussion about this image detection in general, but also generative AI in a webinar next week. And please visit the STM website if you're interested to attend that. Next slide, please. Because we would also like to ask you, first of all, are these recommendations useful? Are they sufficient? But also, what do you see as the biggest threats for the misuse of generative AI, and potentially the focus for this working group going forward? So if we can please launch the poll. And there are 3 questions we would like to ask you and give you a few minutes to answer these.
Stop sharing in the meantime.
Yeah. So if all's well, you've seen our 3 questions, and please spend 2 minutes to answer these. Right? A few more seconds. All right, I'm gonna just share the results. If all is well, you can now see the results. Claudia, can you maybe confirm?
I could already, so
Yeah.
I think that the window is up. Oh, and share results. There you go.
All right, very good. Okay, the first question, does this report address the most important use cases of the use of generative AI? 61% says yes, 1% says no, and 38% says partly. I think that is also our opinion. This is a very fast-moving field, and I'm sure there are going to be updates, and also probably in the suggestions and the questions you have, we have inspiration for maybe an update and further work we can do on this together with the working group. Then the second question, where do you think the biggest risk lies in terms of the use of Gen AI? 93% says authors, and let's say next is the reviewers. Interesting. I think there were some cases indeed of unethical use by reviewers. Vendors, 35%. Editorial teams is only 7%. Interesting. And last but not least, what should be the focus next for this working group? 82% says detection, more control of the use of generative AI. That is going to be a challenging, but indeed a very important one. And more awareness of this recommendation, extending 29%. So thank you very much. This is very useful and good input for us going forward. Good. I see some questions in the Q&A. So let's see how far we can get with answering these. First question. While there is consensus that generative AI should not serve as the primary author of research article books, Springer has notably published works utilizing machine learning and ChatGPT technologies, and also for translating content for one language to another. So on one side, publishers are limiting use of AI, but another it is using for generative content. Maybe I can start with answering that. Yes, I think that is true. I think especially in the early years, there were a lot of experimentation done. There were also authors that, or GenAI that was listed as an author. And I think important to note here is that we're not necessarily, of course, there will be uses of GenAI, and then publishers will also use it. What we try to do here is to come up with recommendations for its use for the regular publication process. So again, author submitting the reviewing and the editing part of that. So I would also say that translation, of course, is definitely a use case. Again, taken that it's done in a proper way, that let's say all the rules and regulations around translation are also being taken into account. And I think very important is that acknowledgement is given and transparency is given. So again, it's not restricting, but the report also really tries to lay down the rules. And again, also when publishers are using this, be very transparent about its use. I don't know if you have anything to add there, Claudia.
About the Springer example, what I always found very sensible is that it was always very clearly marketed as an AI project, so that it was, rather than applying AI throughout the publication process, it was really like the aim of the project was to show how far AI could get at that point in time, and it was really just limited to showing that. Of course, then we're not Springer Nature colleagues, so I don't know the ins and outs of that project, but I always found very sensible just how they presented that. So with also very openly discussing limitations, and safeguards taken and all of that.
Good, thank you. Second question is, how do you identify whether the content is generated through AI? and references made here by an author whereby the suspicion was made that it was generative AI, but not. I think this is a very complex question, and I think there is still an ongoing discussion whether technology will be built that will be able to identify. Our feeling is overall the sentiment is quite negative. So it is very difficult to do that, and there are certainly no trustworthy tools that will be able to determine whether something is created by generative AI. The complication here is, of course, that also with these recommendations, it is used as a basic author support tool. So detection is difficult, but then also it can be used in certain cases. So detection is therefore also of limited value. Yeah, and as you mentioned, indeed, of course, mistakes can be made. So I think that is what makes again this detection quite complicated. Next question: are these guidelines aligned or influenced by any AI standards? I'm not know about the particular one you mentioned, but I should say that absolutely. So first of all, the recommendations we made are completely in line with our own recommendations for AI in general that we published in 2021. And also the recommendations that we put in this report, the practical guidelines, were also based on a lot of the work that individual publishers have done. Claudia, I don't know if you have anything to add to this.
No, very good, Joris. Nothing to add.
Translations. The question is, would you consider this to be beyond the basic authors, basic support tool? Yes, I would say so. In general, if a published work is based on a translation, that the recommendation is to mention that at submission anyway. So I would say yes, if the work is a translation, then again, important to be transparent about it. Also make sure, of course, that the translation was done with respect of copyright. So also here, disclosure is important, is key here.
Yeah, maybe just to add that when making a translation, there's the awareness element usually. So that makes it easier for authors to just disclose when in doubt. I think that especially in this transition periods, it will be really, really important to always make sure to inform just when submitting content, you know, that they underwent an AI editing, and I think that qualifies with translations. I don't think that there is anything wrong in just saying that happened.
Good. Next question: what vendors have been consultant assessed? For example, OpenAI, ChatGPT. Is there any preference for publishers? I don't think we have actively consulted various vendors. And I think also there is no specific vendor that we would recommend for the publishing.
I think when talking about third-party providers, we didn't necessarily, well, we also meant AI companies, but we also intended typical partners of publishers. So they are more, well, closer already part of the publishing infrastructure. So of course they will look to ways to streamline and make their processes more efficient. So that's the bit that we wanted to clarify in their use of AI. We didn't go as far as to think about big AI companies so far.
Good. Yes, interesting question. What is the best way to acknowledge the use of GenAI in a research article? There are reference styles that suggest refer to GenAI in a reference list. Yeah, that's a good question, and maybe that is something we can follow up with more concrete recommendations based on this. I would say that indeed material and methods and acknowledgement section is the most appropriate place to do this. The reference list I have heard of less, and it also would say I would make less sense. But again, I think it is maybe a good follow-up also with this report and to come up with concrete recommendations on how to do that acknowledgement in the article and come up with a standard there.
Yeah, I think that so far publishers have been really well, they've taken different approaches. For some publishers and some journals, there is a very concrete indication as to where the disclosure should happen. I think I've seen even either forms for disclosure or anyway very concrete ways in explaining you know the use of AI, maybe including the you know which prompts were used. And then you know that's then one extreme, and the other extreme is other publishers or journals that would just ask for disclosure without any further indication, at which point the author would be, you know, it would be on the author to decide in which section the disclosure could go. So I agree with yours. Maybe this is worth exploring and discussing to see whether there is a pros and cons as to doing it in one way or another.
Good. There is a question, can you elaborate more on watermark on images? Yes, so the risk of generative AI, and there are already some tools in PowerPoint, for example, which makes it very easy to deploy generative AI and manipulate or even create images. So watermarking would be a system whereby there is some kind of watermark on the image that will make it easier for publishers to establish whether the image is original and has been manipulated. And there's also talk of a system that a hash is created. So whenever, and that will be then done in collaboration with suppliers of lab equipment. So let's say if you create an image with lab equipment, that a hash is created out of that image, then when that image is submitted to a publisher, the publisher can check in collaboration with the provider of the lab equipment whether that image was actually genuine. So whether that particular image was created by the equipment, by the machinery. Again, establishing the validity of the images and making sure that they are not manipulated. That is very early days, but it's something we focus on with STM because we think this might be one of the ways to go again beyond the manuscript and to see whether there are, again, making sure that we can establish that images are real and not manipulated. Looking at the image itself is going to be more and more difficult. We mentioned at the beginning, current technology is based often on duplication or manipulation of existing images. So that is relatively easy to check. A lot of the software that is now being used is detecting that. But again, if you use generative AI, it is a completely new image. There's no reference to check it against. So hence we are also working with those parties to see what we can do. There is a question. Do you think that AI, using AI as a tool to assist in reviewing submissions, such as research articles and book proposals, would help to eliminate bias and inconsistencies? Claudia, it's a difficult question. Maybe you can answer it.
Sure. So I think that the ethical consideration as to the use of AI in peer review is really one of the core ones, and I haven't heard a consolidated view on that. So on one side, you could say, well, humans have bias, make errors, and so you know, to the extent that AI can either equate or have a better score at that than humans, then why don't we give that a go? And I think that there are two elements that are important for consideration. One is to which extent is the AI biased itself, especially with models that are available so far. It's not always that we can really tell how they were trained, what were the data selection processes, how they made sure that their data sets were complete and free of bias to the extent possible anyway. So it's not that because it's an AI, then it will be better and less biased. And the other thing that we always highlight is really the responsibility, the liability eventually that you know, the author can take over the content, and that if they're biased and they will, you know, make certain statements or inconsistencies, or anyway there will be problems of you know, in the content that they produce, in the research that they put out, they will be able to explain why they came to such a conclusion, or they will take responsibility and they will be their name against the research, whereas that is not true for AI. And so that's, I think that that's why we're being extremely cautious with that.
Yeah. All right, let me go through the questions. A lot of questions, that's very good. Does STM have a view on either the ethics or the risk of an author submitting the full text of their article to a publicly available generative AI service for the purpose of generating a lay summary of the article? I think, Claudia, that is explicitly dealt with in the recommendations, right?
Well, what we say about publicly available generative AI is that for now we recommend not using it and not uploading academic material there, really because of these unknown as to how the prompt and the upload will be used. So if it is to generate a lay summary of the article, then we recommend using bespoke tools or tools where you know and have control over how the prompt will be used, and you know whether it will be retained or anyway what how it will be disposed of. So I think we give priority to the confidentiality aspect over the possibility to generate lay summary. Also because if it's a publicly available AI, maybe it's not that accurate, and so you know, maybe quality is better ensured through a different tool. I don't know, Joris, if you wanted to add anything on this.
No, I think that's good. Thank you.
Okay.
Interesting question. Sometimes AI creates non-existent references. Could the screening tools automatically check papers for these references as a first step? Yes, that's interesting. And that's actually something we already do. And there was indeed some cases of references that were, especially in the earlier versions, that the references were created out of thin air. This is actually what we do in the context of the Integrity Hub. We check if the references, if we can retrieve the DOIs of the references in submitted manuscripts. And if the DOIs were provided, we can check whether those DOIs exist. So yeah, that's a good point. And that also comes back to the earlier point. We have to look at a broad set of signals to see whether something is genuine or whether maybe potentially created by a paper mills to fully screen a manuscript. And maybe in line with that, is there a link between paper mills and generative AI? And would advertisement, the use of AI detection be useful for addressing both issues? Interesting question. It is also something we asked in the context of images, and that will be addressed in the webinar next week. So do integrity specialists already see images generated by AI used by paper mills? The initial feedback I received, there is the feeling that they are using these the generative AI, but the picture is not fully clear, and that also has to do with difficulty in detection. The risk, however, is of course that paper mills will use generative AI, but generative AI has an additional risk, is that everybody can use them. So you can also say that the risk is that generative AI will make the use of paper mills obsolete, because everybody now with their own computer can generate research. But yes, so the suspicion is definitely there. We're working hard to detect it, but we don't have that full picture yet. But we can expect that it's definitely being used. Could we share the slides? Yes, we will share a recording of this presentation. Maybe next question, maybe for you, Claudia, how detailed should the transparency be? Should the type and model of AI be stated?
So we didn't go in detail about this, and I suppose that there are also different, granularities that are being required at the moment. I see this in the same bucket as the question above as to where there should be the disclosure, to which extent, so which details should be disclosed, what do we mean exactly by disclosure? These are the type and model of the AI could be that. I think that it would also be interesting to consider why we're asking certain details. So what is relevant for the editor, viewer, reader eventually to know about the AI that has been used. So I don't have an opinion. I don't think that we've explored this, but it may be interesting to look into this.
Yeah. There's a question, interesting question, curious about potential ethical uses to use tools to check content generated by AI. That is an interesting one. So what about using tools to detect AI by publishers? I think we haven't specifically looked into it, also because we don't think it is widely used by publishers yet. Again, so there is no software, there's no tool that is thought to be sufficiently good to able to check incoming manuscript. But once those tools will be available, I think we'll definitely come up with a recommendation there. Interesting question. Other question, do we have a set of specific recommendations for third-party vendors? Claudia, I don't know if you can answer that.
Yes. So the initial considerations do apply to third-party vendors as well. So considerations about ethics, confidentiality, privacy, IPRs, intellectual property rights, and so on, do apply when a publisher is dealing with a third-party vendor as well. And also for them, I mean, they shouldn't be using publicly available tools and platforms where they haven't specified so in their contracts with publishers, and especially without the consent of publishers, certainly. So that same consideration applies to them, and again, it's on the publisher to check what are their agreements, what the clauses that regulate their relation with the vendor.
Thank you. Last question I see, do guidelines specify if there are consequences for authors and reviewers who use AI and don't reveal it? I think this is maybe a good point to mention that, of course, these are recommendations. In the end, it's always the publisher that will have their own set of terms and conditions and also rules around the use of generative AI. So that's not something we recommend. That is the editorial policy of the individual journals and individual publishers. But again, a likely consequence, of course, if the use of generative AI is against the policy, that a rejection is the logical consequence.
And it will be interesting to see, if we see more and more violations from authors, then it may be that there is also more long-term consequences and sanctions of other type. I think it will be interesting, but we're definitely not there.
Yeah. Very good. Lots of questions, lots of discussions. So thank you very much for that. I would say that this is not the end of our work, and we will probably see an update of these recommendations based on these discussions, but also based on, of course, the very dynamic developments in this area. Very good, Claudia. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Just that I just inserted the link to the paper again for people who want to go and check that again now in light of the presentation. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or follow-up conversations. that you want to start about this. And yeah, there will be more coming for sure. And thanks for joining today in the meantime.
Yeah, thank you.